begin with, I've got my Apex 60 machine selected, and I'm using a post processor from January 15th, 2021. And I've got this for 1/4" aluminum. Height setter can work 3 different ways, either Sheetwise, Partwise, or you can give it a stamping distance. Sheetwise, it would just probe once on the first cut on the nested sheet. Partwise, it'll probe once on the first pierce for each part, so in this case it would probe twice. Or you can give it a stamping distance, and if we give it a distance of say 6 inches, then once it gets to that distance away from the last probe, then it will probe again. So in this part it's going to probe on the first cut, and if we set to 6 inches, it should probe on this cut here, here, and then if we draw a circle at the center of this one here with a 6-inch radius, then it should probe on this hole here, and then another 6-inch radius it'll probe on that if we give it a 6-inch stamping distance. So to tell it what mode you want to run that in the process area, click on the gear for settings and go to strategy, and Z-axis control should be height sensor, and in the pull down here you've got your Sheetwise, Partwise, and stamping selections. Dragging is not supported by the height setter. So if we set to Sheetwise, then we'll see that it'll probe once at the very beginning, and put a note down here at the end of the CNC file for our height setter count 1. There's also a dialog box that pops up before you get in there that tells you that. And if we change this to be Partwise, so now the height setter count is 2. So of course we'll still do it on the first cut, and then if we scroll down to the start of the second part, does the M402 there for the next height setter, and we've got that confirmation down there at the bottom. And then if we switch it to stamping and we use a 6-inch stamping distance, then we've got the 5 height setters. Again, first cut, and then 6th cut, which will be up here a little bit. One more cut, there it is. And then on the last hole there before the outside cut, which will be right there. And then a little bit further down here in the program, I've got that one there, and then should be finally before the outside cut for the 5th one. You can also force the height setter to probe for a particular cut. So if we wanted to force it to do a height setter routine on this outside cut, we can go up to Edit and then click on the part, and then go down to the cut that you want to add that height setter routine to. And in this attribute box, there's some different attributes we can put in here to trigger the height setter. So if we do hit, if it's not already in there, hit the plus sign, put in capital HS for height setter, and that height setter attribute is now added to this cut here, and then the height setter will trigger for that cut. So if we go back to process, so now we've got 6 height setters. Since it was already probing for the outside cut on the second part, I didn't need to add it to that one. And if we scroll down here to this cut here, now we see that it's doing the height setter on that cut also. So those are the options for 2D, and now I'll show you a part in the 3D 5X area. So we'll take a look at this 3D 5X part. In this example, I'm setting the stamping distance to 3 inches, So here's the part with some countersinks. So the idea of the stamping distance works the same. You give it a radius, and once it gets outside that radius, it'll do the probe again. So what you want to be careful about is if you have any situations like this where you have something like a countersink, where in this case we're going to be cutting the vertical slot first, and then we'll come back and do the countersink on that. You want to be careful that the height setter is not going to come down on the countersink, because this slug for the vertical cut will have dropped out, and then obviously it'll come down with the height setter, and there won't be anything there, and it'll go down and cause all sorts of havoc. So you have to be pay a little bit of attention to that if you're doing two cuts in basically the same area. In the toolpath box at the end of 2020, they added this attribute box, so similar to the 2D area. If you do want to force it to do a height setter, so if we want to force it to do a height setter on the outside, if that height setter attribute's not already there, again, you just click on the plus sign, type in with uppercase HS, and you can add that to that outside cut to force it to do the height setter on a particular cut. So if we go ahead and let's update this part, we'll just do it in 2D mode. Show us what we want to see here. So we got height setter count 3. I do have my stamping distance set to 3 inches now, so it's gonna do it. And then what I've done is given you this warning here where if there's an area where it's gonna do a height setter within, I believe it's ½ inch of where it's done a previous height setter, it's going to give you this warning here to check and see if you've got an issue. So if we go down to cut 14, which will be second to last cut, so this is cut 15, the outside cut, where we do have our height setter for that we put the attribute on there, and scroll up a little bit to cut 14, we've got it where it's doing the height setter on that, and it's not doing the height setter on the vertical cut because it's just at, or just slightly, like 1/10 of a 1,000th of an inch inside of that 3-inch radius. So if I set this stamping distance to 2.9999, then we're not going to get a warning, because now this lead-in for the vertical cut is just outside of that 2.9999 radius, and it'll do the height setter on the vertical cut, and then so that's the height setter on the vertical cut, and then it's not going to do it, of course, on the countersink now, since that's within that 3-inch radius, and then we'll do it on the outside cut because we had put the attribute on it to do that. So just be careful if you are doing your height setters on countersinks like that. I do have the warning built in there. If we press F5, that'll bring up your post processor, and if you scroll down, so I've got this line here, HS safety zone 12.5 or ½ inch, so if it sees that it's going to do a height setter within ½ an inch of where it's done a previous height setter routine, then that's where it's going to give you that warning. So if you want to change that, you can come in here. This is of course in metric, so if you want it to be 1 inch, you make that 25.4 or whatever. So if you do that, you can always do a file save as and give it a different name so you don't overwrite the original in case you're concerned about making any errors to that, or you can give me a call and I can adjust that for you. But fairly simple just to change that number in millimeters if you want to change that safety zone. So if you have any questions on that, let me know. Thanks.